So my name is Logan. This is Steve. Steve is the doctor here at the HRT nurse practitioner. I'm sorry, at the HRT clinic inside of Leader Fitness here in Tomball, Texas. So a little bit of background. Basically, what happened was Steve and I got caught up in conversation, as we typically do, while my wife was posing, and my wife goes, "Why don't y'all just do a podcast together?" And I've been wanting to do a podcast, and Steve said, "Fuck it, let's do it." So here we are. What, a week later?
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So, Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah. Well, like you said, I'm a nurse practitioner. I've been a nurse practitioner for the last 4 years and a nurse for the first 10 years before that. So in total, a nurse for the last 14 years, like I just said, the last 4 years being a nurse practitioner. All of that being in the ICU, most of that being in cardiac surgery ICU. And then, hell, I'm 37 now, so 22 years ago I decided to get in the gym, become a gym rat because I was fat in high school and didn't like that. So now that I'm able to pursue this HRT clinic inside a gym that I'm part of, it allows me to sort of bring my two passions to life. I think training, bodybuilding, general physical improvement is really where my passion lies, but then my profession and my career ended up in nursing. So if I can go full circle and bring that back, then all the better.
Yeah.
Make me feel a lot more fulfilled and like I'm actually doing something I can sustain indefinitely without actually feeling like I'm
For sure.
working, if that makes sense.
I completely understand that. It's kind of where I am in my pursuit of things, right? Like it's so I work for a water company, basically managing distributors that distribute product to grocery stores and convenience stores, and I basically just make sure they're doing their jobs. But I recently told my wife that, I love everything that I do. I love everything about my life, but my job. But what I have to do 40 hours a week. So I also coach Center Stage Aesthetics, one side of the hat.
Plug.
Yeah, plug. Steve, you're also a coach.
Sort of.
Although
At times.
people don't really, I feel like you're not really like out there with your coaching.
Yeah,
Like-
it's a weird world how that kind of works. I'll just call myself a consultation service.
Consultation service.
Yeah.
But you've turned people pro in the IFBB. I know you have at least one card under your belt. I don't know if you have any others, but so I would say that you've been pretty successful in that endeavor. I've been coaching for a couple of years, and only recently in the last year and a half been trying to make that my full-time job. The coaching is a very slow process.
It is, and for me, it started in training. I never intended on trying to coach anybody. I never intended on any of it.
Yeah.
It was, I like to train, and you go to the gym and somehow 3 hours goes by and you're like, well, where the hell did that go?
Uh-huh.
Same thing. Before this week, I didn't even know what you did when you weren't in the gym. We've had hours of conversation, multiple conversations about some pretty deep topics.
Yeah.
We never talked about what you do for a living.
Yep.
Right? And I guess that goes down to it's not what you're passionate about, because you're going to talk about what you're passionate
It's
about.
completely irrelevant to me,
And same thing when it comes to the idea of coaching. For me, it's just I've always been more, somehow during the process of training, I gravitated towards training, and intense training is where it all begins, is where it's
Absolutely.
all important. And as I got more and more experienced in the gym, you have people start to approach you about some things. It's actually funny because I was a small guy, right? And you always pair off, or get a couple of guys that you train with, and I started off as the guy trying to learn from everybody and trying to get better, and then I was the person who started taking it more seriously and getting actually deeper into how to train. And then I started getting aggravated because people would go to my training partner or my training partners and ask them questions, and then they would just look at me. It's like, if you want to know that, just ask that guy. And so it became very personal to me that I was knowledgeable and capable and pushing myself and everybody else really hard, but I wasn't the one people were approaching, right? And then slowly people started approaching me and asking my opinion on things. Then they started telling me the advice they were being given by other people. And I was like, that's terrible advice. Whether it's about training, about diet, or finally in the world of supplement use and gear use. And so finally it was like, I just, rather than trying to correct what other people are, the bad information other people are giving to my friends, to try to get ahead of that. So sort of fell into coaching for that reason. But even with that, the diet and supplement aspect of things, I've just never been particularly passionate about. But training, for me, everything's training.
Yeah,
it's all training. And if I just had that conversation with some potential clients just a little bit ago, it's just, it all starts there. That's what you should be enjoying. That's where your passion should be. And you can hate getting up in the morning for cardio. You can hate staying up late for cardio and trying to go to bed early and trying to put your whole life around the pursuit of a look. And that means diet, that means supplements, that can mean gear, that can mean all these different things that can be miserable. But when you walk into the gym, that needs to be what you enjoy. Right?
For sure.
And the intensity needs to be something that you appreciate. And trying to better yourself, whether it's in with whatever measure, whether it's a measure of, being very linear in a logbook and how good you feel about where you are in prep or off season, and, you're able to add weight to the bar, add reps, or have better control, or, whatever progression is progression. But if your hunger and passion and enjoyment of training starts to falter, then your physique goes to shit. And it never fails. Every time I see that happen to people, they don't look good anymore. When they're just going through the motions in training, their physique follows.
Yep.
No amount of being perfect on diet and no amount of supplementation or anything else is going to, for me, take the place of going in and actually enjoying training.
Well, in part, what you're saying is that you have to love the process, right? And the reality is that the process is, you have to train your ass off, right? Like, that is, sure, we have to eat, and we have to eat all of our meals. But when it boils down to it, like, we have to eat for survival anyways, right? Sure, we have to eat a little bit more, and depending on how far you want to go, right? Like, that can affect, like, how you structure an off season and stuff of that nature. But, like, the training is the one thing that all the time needs to be, you need to be intense, right? And I just heard Mike Israetel say something, and it really resonated with me. He said, if you want to be a good bodybuilder, if you want to be an elite level bodybuilder, you can't just go in and have a mediocre session. It's either time to pull back, where your session is really, really light, and it's for recovery purposes, or you're busting your ass as hard as you can, and you're giving everything you've got, right? And that's just, it's part of the process, right? And to do that, you have to love it. You have to love training.
And it's weird, because it's not, I say enjoy it, and I say love it, I say all those things, but it's not like I'm walking to the gym with a smile on my face because today I'm going to kill myself on a hack squat. But it's some level of appreciation that you have for that, right? And
pushing yourself to a different level.
Right, it's hard to put into words, but that's why I've also never understood people who talk about training angry and doing all this stuff, because training distracted is never a good idea, especially if you're somebody who's going to be actually trying to get through. You can direct frustrations and that kind of thing, but that's never been me.
I think that there's a, I'll speak for myself. For me, there was an evolution, right? When I was 16 years old, so I got into bodybuilding because when I was 16 years old, I decided to quit football. I was at that point in my life where it was like, I really want to pursue the things that I think that I can excel at, and pull back on the things that I can't, right? So I was a good pole vaulter at the time. And, as a freshman, I was competing on the regional level, and I was really trying to get to that state level. And football was just leading to shoulder injuries. And for a pole vaulter, shoulder injuries don't really align, right? So I decided to quit football, and the defensive back coach sat me down and he told me, he says, Logan, if you quit football, you're going to get fat and lazy. I said, well, fuck you. Like, I've always been that kind of guy that's like, you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to go do it, right? And so I didn't. So I started training on my own, and just like any 16-year-old does, he starts working out outside of like high school athletics, right? Like with some actual volume, with some actual intensity, and not just 3 lifts. He grows a little bit of muscle, right? So then you start to get attention from women. Your friends start to notice, right? And you become addicted, right? Well, then it became, this is also an outlet for me to escape from my home life, right? Because around the same time, I have 2 brothers, and I have a brother and a sister. They're both twins. And then at the time, I also had a stepbrother and sister that were my age that we hadn't seen in a decade. And they had some bad situations happen, and they had to come live with us in our 3-bedroom house. So there was 3 boys in one room and 2 girls in another. And it was rough, to say the least. And so, like, getting away from that, right? Like, to me, training angry back then was all I knew how to do, right? And even through college, it was always, training was an outlet, training was a therapy. And then I think that lasted up until a few years ago, to be honest. And then I almost had to, like, re-fall in love with training again, right? Like, I had to find another driving force. Like, training angry didn't work anymore, right? It was no longer therapy. It didn't make sense for it to be therapy, right? I was training because I wanted something more, and I wanted something bigger, and then you fall in love with, like, getting better at training, mm-hmm. and finding new ways to train, and things of that nature, right? Adding bands, alternating, changing movements around to, like, target different muscles, so on and so forth, right? The figuring it out portion. So for me, it was definitely an evolution. I trained for probably 7 or 8 years angry as therapy.
No, I can understand that. There's actually, I didn't know any of that about you. There's a lot of parallels in what you're saying to me. It did not start in sports for me. It started as being kind of a nerdy guy in high school and not being happy with what I saw, not getting attention from women, which that didn't really change. So I actually got on the football team late in high school, mm-hmm. because I didn't want to be fat anymore.
Yeah.
And because, I was never fat, but I just looked like your standard high school
kid.
Yeah. Definitely not an athlete.
Yeah.
And so I got on the team to do that. Couldn't have cared less about football at the time, but it was an excuse for me to get in shape. And then so got a lot of bad advice from coaches on how to train and what mm-hmm. to do, and that led me to actually go to a little military gym in Fort McClellan, Alabama. Mm-hmm. And looking around there were some, like, very stoic, machine-like guys that just trained perfectly. Like, you'd look at them and it was just, it could have been a magazine.
Yeah.
Right? It could have been literally a comic, like
mm-hmm.
A to B, B to A, A to B, mm-hmm. B to A. And it was like, it was amazing, right? And it took me a while to appreciate that, and I still went for the same thing. I think everybody has a maturity that they have to build to learn how to train, but once I got through the immature facts, or the immature aspects of it, and trying to actually understand what you're doing when you're loading a muscle, when you're going through these things, it changed. And that's kind of when it went from me training with these guys to those guys training with me.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know, something happened early in, probably, so I started training when I was 15. It's probably in my mid-20s when I started thinking about bodybuilding. Did my first bodybuilding show when I was 26.
Okay.
26, 28.
I did mine at 25.
So somewhere around there, I started looking around and realizing people were not serious about training, and they didn't know it.
Yeah.
They thought they were, but they didn't know what failure was. They didn't know what control was.
Yep.
They didn't know what any of this stuff was. And that's when I started becoming very, very just motivated to pursue that to its fullest.
Sure.
Right? And trying to really understand what goes into really training hard. And there's a lot of talk nowadays about how going to failure, or what the most optimal thing to do is. And, and how these machines are better, and how these movements are better, and how this level of effort is better, and all these different things. And it's funny because I stumbled upon a lot of that on my own.
Yeah.
Not that there weren't resources out there to look into it, but who's going to look into muscle stimulation and growth studies when they're 25 years old?
Yeah.
Working night shift as a nurse. Not very many people. So it turned into figuring out a lot of that stuff on my own, and then trying to convey that to people, right? But one of the weird things that happens to me, and I guess it happens to other people, is when you really get into a training session, or really get into something, generally talking about, it's always easy to talk about intensity when you're talking about training quads, right? But if I were to put you on a hack squat, and that's actually where we met. We met on a hack squat.
Yep. Yes, we
met
did.
on a hack squat. And if I put you on a hack squat and find the appropriate weight and put you through these clusters, or put you through a set to force rep failure, right? Force rep mechanical failure. If I do that for you, then somewhere in there, right? It's weird to call it an out of body experience, but somewhere in there, you're watching yourself struggle for these reps. You're not really even experiencing it, as you're not driving anymore.
I know exactly what you mean.
And when that happened to me, I don't exactly remember when, but when that happened to me, when it really was me watching myself struggle to get through something, but being in control of it, almost like lucid dreaming.
Yep.
Right? When that happened, I started to pursue that, and you don't do that by accident.
Yep.
If that makes sense. Is that stupid?
No, I know exactly what you mean. I've had a couple of those experiences. So it's funny that you say that, because I know exactly what you're talking about. But when you're training, I almost feel like you only get that experience on something like a hack squat, on something that is completely taxing to the entire nervous system. But it has to be like when you're on a hack squat, you're using all of your legs. You're using glutes, quads, hamstrings, the entire thing. And a lot of times you're even pushing up through your chest and your shoulders up against the handles, right? Like it's an entire movement, entire body movement. So maybe deadlifts or squatting or something like that, you can experience the same on. But I actually have experienced it, and this is kind of weird to say, but I actually experienced it on my first date with my wife.
No, I understand.
It was like I was reacting and I was having conversation, but there was this like myself was back here, and it was observing me talk and me think and me everything else, right? And it's the same thing when you're on that hack. It's like you're just sitting back here and you're going through those reps and you're listening to those cues and you're listening to your spotter say one more rep, and you're just flowing, but you're also noticing everything around you. you're screaming because you're in so much pain.
But that's an echo, right?
But it's an echo, right? Like it's almost like it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like and you're noticing every little bitty thing around you. Like it's like adrenaline is so. I don't know if it's like adrenaline is so high that you're just so. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
I've had people actually explain it to me. In high school, we had this running back, and oddly enough, he was my bully as a kid. Obviously, that kind of grew out of it as we got older. But he was short. He was like 5'4" little muscular guy, super fast. But he wasn't just fast in a straight line. Like his agility was crazy. And he would just run back and forth across the field and make everybody miss him and score touchdowns. And I was like, how do you do that? And he's like, it's almost like I'm not even doing it. He's like, it just happens. You couldn't even explain it, right? Like he's like, I'm just watching myself do it. That's such an interesting thing to me.
Mm-hmm. And I think you say, well, and I guess now that I think about it, I've had a couple of parallels in relationships, including with my wife. I hadn't really put that together until you said it, but it's funny because when you think back to those moments, you don't really have a memory of the activity. You don't really have a memory of the set or even the difficulty of the set. You just remember not being like, I don't know. It's almost a gap, a dream, right? It's like
you're flooded with so much. Maybe it's a response of like a dopamine or serotonin that's flooded so much, or it could be adrenaline that's flooded your system so much that you're able to separate yourself a little bit. I don't know, but it is a very interesting experience to have happen, and I can tell you that I remember that session because I only did hack squats, and I did maybe 2 leg presses, 2 sets on leg press, and I was done. That was the first time I ever did. Well, I was also a couple weeks post show, right?
Yeah.
Was I post nationals?
I don't remember exactly the scenario.
I had to have been.
Yeah.
Or I could have been. Was it? No. Because this is when I was looking for a new coach. So, yeah, it was post-nationals. Yeah. So, we had to have been just like 2 or 3 weeks post-nationals in 21. And we were having a conversation about potentially working together. I think I just decided to work with Andrew Barry.
Yeah.
But you were nice enough to let me join you guys in a workout, you and Brian. And we did a top set, a back off set, and a set of clusters. First time I ever did clusters. And I remember that was the most painful set of my fucking life. God bless.
I still think that if you do clusters right, I still think clusters on a hack squat, if you can't grow your legs with that, if you can't grow your legs with clusters on a hack, I was actually just talking to Charles the other day, and it was, if you can pursue 6 plates for 6 clusters on that Cybex hack, there's no fucking way your legs aren't going to grow. Period. Right? And he's somebody who can already do 5 plates for, like the other day I think he did 5 plates for 6, 6, 4, 4, 6 or something.
Yeah.
With a little bit of help. But it's, if you pursue that, right, then you're going to grow.
Yeah.
You know, that's just a different level of difficulty. But the same thing when it comes to the top sets where, you know, my goal is to get you to 12, but you're starting to reach failure at 8.5.
Yeah.
But even that carries into the topic of, and I could spend a long time talking about shitty bodybuilding spots, right? People who don't know how to do that. But in order to grow, you actually have to be helped.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's going in here and training with true intensity to near failure without somebody assisting them in those hard, stable reps. Right?
And I would argue that it's more important for leg development
100%.
than most of anything else. When you learn to take it there with your leg training, that's when they grow. That's when they really grow.
Well, and then when you've done that, it carries over to your other training too.
Yeah.
You know, it's. I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit, and so
this is how it normally goes.
But, you know, I don't think you can put somebody through those sets, right? Like you just talked about, top set, back off set clusters, right? I don't think you can put somebody through that where they truly are just dying, right? And it's not even because it's too heavy or that they're out of breath. It's just your muscle. You're so stimulated, so much muscle tissue is stimulated that you just reach the end.
Well, at that point, your quads are burning. You're seeing stars. Your entire CNS is fried, basically.
But when you can do that, when you can reach that level there, which is a different level compared to anything else, then is a set of rows really hard? Is a set of presses really hard?
For sure.
It's training fucking arms really hard. You know, when you do any of that stuff. You know, the only thing that might be the only movement that I could compare to the difficulty of the safe intensity of a hack squat is an assisted Nordic, right? And that's a weird thing to say, right? But that's a machine that if you do it right, you end up pulling with everything you have
and just not
moving. It's just not moving, and then somebody just like gives you a finger on the shoulder to keep you moving, and then it's the hardest pull you can ever have, but you're giving it literally everything to get to the top, and it's that like jerky.
That's funny. I actually know what you mean.
And everything else, but outside of really difficult hacks with a good spotter, and that movement, I can't think of anything else that puts you in the same place. Because you're going to fail somewhere mechanically on a deadlift, or a barbell squat, or a barbell rows, or anything else. But with those two movements, you can go to a different place.
But you just said a key term. You can fail mechanically, right? And that's where I think that something like a hack squat is so easy to lock into, to where your mechanical failure is true failure too. Whereas with other things like a deadlift, more than likely you're going to mechanically fail before your body fails. You know what I mean? Right? On a squat, you're going to mechanically fail before the entire system does. And so that's part of the reason as to why we say that hack squats are one of the only things that you can take to that level, and you can experience that portion of things, right? Because once we fail mechanically is really where we should stop. For 98% of movements. I mean, maybe there's a couple you can argue that you can have a little give on, but for the most part, you're talking about risking injury at that point, right?
Well, and it's quickly seen by a lot of things, like whether if it's a row. I mean, I think you can do closer on rows because you can get a little sloppy on rows safely, right?
Sure.
You can allow your legs, hamstrings, glutes, and everything else to give you a little bit of assistance to get your weight up a little ways and let your back do the rest of the work. But people want to be intense on a press, right? It's like, great. The back is this big.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
You can only get so intense on this muscle group.
Yep.
Right? People want to get real intense on a shoulder press. You can only get so intense with this, right? But something's different about legs when it comes to hacks. You could probably put pendulums in there.
I would agree.
Something's different whenever you're talking about posterior chain, but then again, same thing. The only true focused way to do posterior chain, like I said, I think is that assisted Nordic, because that's you're scraping the bottom of the barrel cleanly, right?
Yeah.
Whereas RDLs, they're going to turn into a deadlift. any other kind of leg curl or anything else is going to turn into something else, right? Yep. Any of the big compound movements that are touted by everybody, which are great, right? Squats, deadlifts, rows, RDLs, whatever. All those things are fantastic. But something fails before the target muscle, usually.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, basically all we're saying is that to learn true failure, get on a fucking hack squat. 100%. 100%. We just said all that to get to that one fucking point.
Very simple point.
You know what I've actually been focused on lately is, and I've done this with particular muscles previously, but I think I've started to, because I'm so weary about my pec, right? Like, I've started to focus on, like, when I'm in the bottom, I've always been very explosive, right? Because I powerlifted, and strength was really what I loved for a long time. And now that I'm strictly focused on bodybuilding, focused on becoming a pro and things of that nature, right? Like, I'm looking more into, like, well, how can I be the absolute biggest possible, right? And so I'm focusing a lot more on, like, when I'm down here in this stretch, contracting the pec and not just pressing, right? So we contract the pec to get it moving instead of just pressing, right? I took one set till failure yesterday, and I'm on my chest is rocked today. Like, it's just an entirely different feeling altogether of allowing it to, like, completely expand and then contract from its fully lengthened state together. Right? And I've been doing that with everything, right? Like, my lats, like, making sure that and then contracting from that fully lengthened state.
Well, and the two movements, particularly for chest, that I think are beneficial for that are actually, I just found it, which is that standing press.
Standing press is gnarly.
I think that's great, but that as an extension of a slight incline Smith machine, right? Because you need something stable to push against, right? I like dumbbells. I've done heavy dumbbell presses. Heaviest dumbbell presses I think I've ever done are 160 pounds for like 8 reps. You know, I've done very, very heavy, but the most effective chest training I've ever done has been heavy incline Smith machine.
Yeah.
Right. That's coming from, I can take, at my strongest, I've repped 365 on incline barbell. I did 365 on an incline Cadillac bar.
Yeah.
Right. I've done a lot of weight with those, but something's different about exactly what you're saying, being able to control the track, right? Not having to control the track on like a Smith machine, and really being able to for me, it's almost feels like a scoop, right? Scoop is a weird word, but is like you say, you get here, and then rather than just focus on this, it's feel this, drive that way, right? And I've not had anything show me that better than an incline Smith. Yeah. But the problem is, the heavier you get, the more that feeling goes away, and there's some level of benefit of going maybe a little bit heavier than allows that feeling, and then carrying back into it. Yep. Right.
No, I absolutely agree, because I've experienced that a lot, where it's like, okay, I was able to do that weight for an easy 10 to 12, like, I might need to go up, right? Like, or let's say, like, I want to progress this following week, but the weight's just a little too heavy for that contraction point, right? Like, and so you start reverting to those, just pressing it, because you can absolutely just press it.
But for me, the reset button on that is a loaded stretch, right? Because to do a loaded stretch, you have to be a little sub-maximal on the weight, right? But then when you get there, and you, particularly with chest, you get there and you feel that stretch. It's almost like you can feel every fiber across your chest just screaming. And as soon as it screams, it's very easy to then have it go. Yep. Right. So when you find yourself in that place, do a drop down to a loaded stretch, right? Carefully, safely, right? under good control. Yeah. But I think that's the reset there. Is you give up a little bit of feel to get the benefit of some weight. Yeah. but then you give yourself the next set. It's not about failure on this next one. It's just about getting back into that, feeling your muscle, feeling your
reconnecting that
chest,
mind and muscle.
right?
Right.
And nothing does that better than a loaded stretch.
Yeah.
Even if you talk about quads, you want to die, you do a hard set of hacks where you're just trying to survive, and then you do pause hacks, right? With an half that loaded stretch for a minute, and that's a different feel. You've reconnected with your quads. Now go do some extensions and die.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens.
You've already died once. Go die again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying to focus on that with my back, right? Like, my back came up a lot this off season, but as we both know, those last 3 weeks from my regional qualifier to nationals, my width just fucking disappeared, right? Like, which that was the newest muscle that I'd put on.
Last muscle on, first muscle off.
So it wasn't particularly surprising when I needed to get to the level of conditioning that I needed to be at.
Yeah.
So this off season, I'm really focusing on, like, first off, I've been listening to a little bit of Mike Van Wyck and how he trains and how he talks about, like, how the back should be trained and how the muscles move and things like that. And I've picked up a few things that have put my lats in position where, like, so this entire region, so I tore my pec in 21, 5 weeks after nationals. I was bench pressing. I was in a very bad place mentally, so I was bench pressing like an idiot. And third rep, 365, I tore my pec. 6 weeks later, I had surgery. And USA's was my comeback to the stage, try to get a redemption at nationals, which didn't happen, but I was very happy with the look that we brought.
You didn't just come back; you came back improved.
But drastically improved.
Right, and that's what matters.
Yeah, drastically.
A lot of people, they have an injury, especially something like that. They're so fucked mentally that it's just you never even get back to where you were.
Yeah.
Much less better. And there's a lot of improvement you still have to do.
I totally lost where I was going with that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I lost where I was going with it before you even spoke up.
Well, I apologize. I definitely didn't help.
My brain does that sometimes. But
You were talking about that entire region.
so my back, right? Like, so the entire region is fucked, basically, right? Like, because of the whole healing process, a lot of muscles overcompensated, and then it's like trying to figure out how to retrain them to get them to relax and recompensate, right? Like, and it's expensive to get muscle work done every week, so you do as much as you can on your own. But through the process, I found out that basically all 4 of my rotator cuff muscles, so subscap, infraspinatus, supraspinatus, and what am I missing? I'm missing one.
I'm not going to come up with it.
Okay. All of them had minor tears in the tendons. And so it makes this portion here really tight all the time. Or it is really tight all the time. So I learned that, like, some engagement of that lat, right, like through the front, and it's been really stretching it out and allowing for a lot better contraction points. And opening up my back, and I'm really excited now because I've never been able to, like, to feel that loaded stretch through the actual lat, and feel it, like, stretch, and finding it in that pain point where I know it needs to relax, where I know it needs to give, was really exciting for me. Really exciting for my off season.
Well, again, I think for bodywork reasons, for like actually going and have somebody actively try to release some things, as well as just training. I think particularly people who are tight like that, finding yourself in that uncomfortable stretch at the end of a set, or even just finishing your set and going back and only doing a loaded stretch. We talked about that at tier. Particularly with regard to, I think it was just just
No, it was opening my back up.
It was just straight hangs from a from bar as well as seal rows.
For me getting my height, and then for unlocking my like traps and rhomboids and everything like that. Yeah.
And traction is great. You know, being in that point of traction is really, really beneficial for those things, but it's real uncomfortable too.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I actually had a client that I was training in person. He's an online client now. We did first couple weeks in person, right? So he could understand how I wanted him to train and get familiarized with the gym and the machines and things like that. And I noticed when he was, he had one side in particular that was a little rough. And I noticed whenever he was doing like a seal row, like his rhomboid was knotted up. And I mean knotted up to the point of like it set probably 1 inch to 1.5 inches higher than his other side. So all we had him do is a loaded stretch on that seal row, and you could watch it just
release. I picture kind of you see it in cartoons, like you see it in talking to the Incredibles, right? He's being ripped apart by a robot, his back pops and everything's good, right? Traction.
Yep.
And that's
the fact that you brought up Incredible.
Look, man, look. I'm sorry, Mr. Incredible. We're you know, if you don't want to be Mr. Incredible or Goku or Vegeta or Gohan or whomever, then we can't be friends. But there's a lot to say about it. Somebody's fingers and hands, even if they get a metal rod and metal tools and everything else, that can do so much. And I think there's a lot of benefit in that. I think there's a lot of benefit in dry needling. I mean, you're not going to break up scar tissue, right, very easily. But put 100 pounds, 200 pounds, 200, puts a significant amount of weight safely on a bar and just let it pull muscles back into alignment, pull your tissues back into alignment, pull everything back to where it needs to be. That's what's going to do it. I mean, I'm sorry, someone's hands aren't going to do the same thing that a bar can do in that way.
So I think
does that make sense?
Yeah.
To someone,
well, it does because I've experienced it. Right now, I also think that. And this is part of what I'm going through now, right, is learning that the back, and again, I'm learning this by listening to Mike Van Wyck, and I think that he's actually extremely knowledgeable when it comes to training, and I like what he has to say, right? He talks about the back is all moving. It's designed to move as one piece, right? It's designed to be functional. It's not designed to lock in and one muscle moves and that's it, right? And you're never going to have that. So by allowing it, by training it, right, through those full ranges of motion and allowing those lats and that teres, and that's what it was the teres that tore. And allowing the teres to stretch and everything, right? And then working through it, but understanding and knowing how to still contract your lat, right? And working through those full ranges of motion is what really is going to not just elevate like hypertrophy, but also keep you from having to having so much knotting up, right? Because you're essentially loading that stretch every time, right? You're just not holding a loaded stretch.
Well, that's why whenever I've ever tried to explain to somebody how to train back, I've never been a fan of training lats.
Yeah.
Right? When it got really popular for people to get on, a machine and do this little, this 4 inches of bullshit to really target their lats. Like, first off, you need to have a back to give a shit about that, right? But most people get into a row, get into any kind of these movements, and they're all upper back and traps.
Yeah,
right.
100%.
And you've seen that, and that ends up being its own dysfunction.
Yep.
Right. So it's like if you can show somebody how to engage their lats and utilize that to initiate a row, right? The rest of the back take care of itself.
Yep.
If you can do a functional row, you can build your back really well off of just that, right? without trying to focus on upper back and do a bunch of shrugs and do, high elbow for upper back and low elbow for lats. Just engage fucking lats. Do a good heavy row, with a barbell, with a dumbbell, with cables, all three, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And you're going to be good. But exactly that, you can't expect to spend your life here.
Yeah.
Right? With everything contracted and then be normal.
Yeah,
but that's
for
what
sure.
happens, right? Is people spend all the time up here,
mm-hmm.
right? Or the only time they're in a stretch is when they're in a stretch reflex, using the rest of the body to get up, right?
Yep.
So everything functional is dysfunctionally here.
Yeah.
Right? But you lay on an incline bench with a dumbbell, with 100-pound dumbbells in your hands, suddenly it pulls everything
Yep.
out. And it's not going to, unless you're an idiot, using way too much weight,
Yeah.
right? It's not going to pull you out of where you should be anatomically relaxed anyway.
Yeah.
Right? Your body relaxes generally into what it should be in.
Yeah.
Right? And when you have those knots and everything else, the best way to release those things is through traction.
Well, I think you made a good point in that you have to have a back to be specific, right? And so for 98% of people training, you just need to build a big fucking back, right? And then if you're on stage and the judges tell you that, hey, you need some more upper back, you need some more lower traps, right? Okay, we can focus, right? But build a fucking back first.
Right.
Like,
yeah, it's just like that transformation photo that Justin Shearer posted is the dumbest back transformation I have ever seen. Okay.
Chris Bumstead had a good one a few years ago, and his was only a year.
And in 2 years, 3 years, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it went from
non-existent,
good, maybe national level or double. I mean, it went from being he looked good, right? To he changed shit. One, the way he poses, but he built himself, and it's a great.
Yeah.
But Justin Shearer went from not having a back to straight up nasty.
Yeah.
He took the best comparison I've seen, or I can make with him. I think he is as close to Justin Compton as you can get.
Interesting.
Nowadays, I think you take Justin Compton and Dennis Wolf, and you have Justin Shearer, right? It's his physique's different.
It's very different.
His physique's different, but the whole point of that is he didn't grow that back doing this shit, right? This is somebody who lifts weights with focused intensity.
Yep.
Right.
Well, so I've always been like, I really wish I would have gotten into bodybuilding earlier. I really wish that I would have. I wish I would have found a mentor when I was 16 or when I was 18. Right. I actually had a guy that offered to mentor me at 18, and then he just left me high and dry. Which he's still around my hometown, and he's actually a pro. But I think that, but then I also think of people like Justin, and he didn't get into bodybuilding until he was already matured. He already had the financial setup, right? And he went after it from day one, doing things the way he should, right? Whereas I spent literally a decade trial and error, doing things the wrong way, eating the absolute wrong way, right? Like, it's like, I understand Sam Sulik. I'm sure you've been have you seen the shit about him? So basically, Sam Sulik is a guy who's really big on YouTube. He's 21 years old. He's like 5'11", 6 foot, like 240. Like, kid is massive, okay? He looks great. Fuad actually decided to sponsor him, and Fuad did a video with him about his day of eating, right? Kid ended up drinking like 1.5 gallons of milk, donuts, cereal, and that was basically his entire diet for the day, right? But in his defense, all he's worried about is calories. He's like, I've got to get this much protein in, I want at least this many carbs. How I get it, I don't care. He's a 21-year-old. He goes to college, and I believe he works, and he pumps out content like crazy. And he trains his ass off, right? So, I was I felt for that because at 21 I was that, right? I was consuming a gallon of milk with Russian Bear protein, which, do you know what that is?
I don't.
Russian Bear. Okay, so Russian Bear.
Sounds fantastic.
You would mix these three. There was like 3 servings per container. Okay, and you would mix like 4 or 5 laundry detergent size scoops of this protein powder with a gallon of milk. So it was like 5,000 calories, a couple hundred grams of protein, right? Like.
So the difference between you and me is I've never been blessed with the idea of that. I was fat from the beginning.
Well, I was skinny from the beginning.
So trying to put on weight was never the problem. Every prep I ever did, I ended up under 1,200 calories doing 2 hours of cardio.
Whew.
That was every single one.
Yep. I mean, this prep I ended up under 1,600 calories doing 2 hours of cardio. So,
got you there.
Which I was, sitting. Yeah. Got me there. So anyways, but on top of that, I was also eating like, you can get like the breaded chicken that's frozen. I would eat those from like HEB or whatever. So I was just basically shitting my brains out all day. Not growing at all, right? So it's things like that, right? Like I did things, and I tried to diet at one time. Like I started dating the first girl that was ever into fitness. Like my first girlfriend that was ever into fitness, her stepdad was a pro, but he was in the military and he was stationed in like Japan or something. And she was like, "Oh, like you need to be eating 5,000 calories, but it's got to be like brown rice and chicken, and eggs and oatmeal." I still eat eggs and oatmeal to this day, right? I throw some protein powder in it to make it taste good. Yeah. But like, I still eat chicken and rice, but I'm damn sure I'm not eating brown rice.
Yeah. There's no point.
No. So I was like freezing. So I was cooking all this food for an entire week, and I was like freezing the last couple of days of food so it would still be good. And it was just absolutely disgusting. And so like, I would undercook my chicken because I was 21 years old and didn't know how to cook chicken properly. Yeah. And again, I was in the bathroom every 30 minutes, walking around bow-legged because I was sore. Yeah. And so I got this. It's a good way to live. I got this notion of like, well, food doesn't work. Like if I'm eating all of this food and I'm still not growing, right? Like, but pro hormones at the time did. Right? Like, I could take a pro hormone and I would put on 10 pounds. Yeah. And that 10 pounds didn't go anywhere when I came off. So I was like, drugs, right? So for the next several years, I dove into drugs. Yeah. And I figured out drugs and hormones. And I spent several years just diving into researching about drugs and hormones. That was throughout college, so I was broke, so I couldn't afford any of it. Yeah. And when I could, I bought it. But, yeah, spent a decade doing it wrong, and then at 25, I kind of started to figure it out.
I mean, exactly, so to that point, when you have somebody who can expedite that process of fucked up trial and error and start at the end with as much optimized as possible.
Yep. And honestly, that's part of the reason I got into coaching.
Yeah. Same thing. I'll see guys training, and the vast majority of people, you approach a guy in the gym, they're immediately defensive. Pride goes up. There's no good way to try to go up to most people in the gym and give them any kind of constructive advice. But sometimes you find those people who are receptive. Yeah. And I try to be on the lookout for those type of people. Mm-hmm. Right. In truth, you were one of them, right? That's why I didn't mind getting to know you and having you join me for some training and doing all that, because I was like, this is somebody I think is going to listen and is probably going to actually benefit. Yeah. Right? Moving forward. But when you catch those and you're like, I can save you years of bullshit. Yeah. If you'll just listen to me for a little bit. Mm-hmm. Right? And it makes a big difference. Yep. And then that led me to that, and we already talked about how.
It's the whole point, man. I just want to help these young guys that are, man, and it's so funny because when I first started coaching, I had an entire roster of like 10 to 15 guys who were all 23 and younger, and they were all talking about things, doing things, having the same questions, all the same shit that I did. And I'm like, hey, I've been where you are. I know what you're doing. I know what your thought process, this is what you're thinking, right? Like, I understand why you're thinking this way, but like what you're reading doesn't necessarily align with like real life, right? Like, and it was so funny because I was literally watching me as a young guy do it, and I'm like, let me help you avoid that. And a couple listened, most didn't, as young men do, right? We all have to learn the hard way. Most of us have to learn the hard way. I like to think that I probably would have been a little bit more receptive had I've had somebody, because I wanted it. Unfortunately, growing up in Livingston, Texas, moving to Huntsville, Texas, you didn't have all that. So, but here we are today. Learning and growing, and truthfully, I don't think that even when we met, we could have been sitting here today